Happy Halloween! I've made it clear that I'm not a big fan of scary games, but since we're in the middle of a Zelda retrospective right now, I thought I'd do a different kind of Halloween themed video this year. I'm all dressed, so let's look at the trilogy of Zelda CDI games because it is scary how bad they are. I'm gonna put this down because it's sharp.
Come on, let's go fight Ganon's evil legions. I'll show you how.
When I'm crouching, you can make me do the duck walk. Cool, huh? I guess that's worth a kiss, huh?
Huh.
I won!
So, I'll admit, I've never learned much about these games outside of the memes, and CDI emulation is not exactly easy to do, so I never had the desire to put in the effort just to play these terrible, no good, very bad video games. But, unlucky for me, some dedicated fans have put in the work to make them all playable in one form or another. And sadly, they're also the best versions of these games. The two most infamous ones, Link, the Faces of Evil, and Zelda, the Wand of Gamelon, have both been pretty faithfully recreated inside the Game Maker engine. And Zelda's Adventure, the even more maligned game despite playing closer to a traditional Zelda game, has been reimagined as a Game Boy title, but still basically the same, just with Link's Awakening style graphics, less confusing controls, the lack of those FMV cutscenes, etc. And the two side-scrolling games at least look and play nearly identically to their CDI counterparts, for better or worse. I couldn't get very far into either one of them without a guide, and even then I didn't want to keep going, so I'll say it's for the worst, but honestly, I'm not sure you could fix these games without fundamentally turning them into something else. Though on that note, the person that ported Faces of Evil and Wand of Gamelon over to Game Maker a few years ago is also working on an original kind of spiritual successor to those games called RZ. And it actually looks pretty good, so maybe you can make those games good by turning them into something else. I'd honestly rather play through all of Zelda 2 without mods or save states than even touch these games, but, you know, 'tis the season. Let's get on with it. Link, the Faces of Evil, and Zelda, the Wand of Gamelon both came out on October 10th, 1993. Meaning we just had the 30th anniversary. Oh boy. And it also means that they're kind of like a monkey's paw version of the Oracle games, except they don't connect to each other in any way. They just reuse a lot of the same assets and have very similar items and enemies. The Faces of Evil follows Link in a pretty traditional save the princess plot that's sloppily told through now infamous FMV cutscenes. I'll admit they have a charm to them, as the characters swirl around the screen with over-exaggerated animations, and they do look quite a bit better than the rest of the game, where you can't even tell what's interactable, platforms have no collision detection, and everything else just kind of blends together in the background. The Wand of Gamelon is pretty similar, but flips the script in one key way. Though the game isn't canon, it does feature the series' first instance of Zelda being playable, as she ventures out to rescue Link for once. But it kinda feels like they just swapped out the protagonist so that you could tell which game is which, because aside from that, you'd be forgiven for not knowing which one it is based on just the gameplay footage. I'm not doing a full review of these games or anything, because this is just a quick and fun little Halloween video, and frankly I couldn't be bothered to play them long enough, but the progression pretty much boils down to scouring the world map for what areas you can enter, and then exploring those areas to see if there's anything you can actually do yet, such as talking to NPCs to open up new areas, collecting new items from shops or enemies, entering a dungeon, etc. There's little to no guidance despite the focus on FMV cutscenes, and since I started with Faces of Evil, I don't even know how to play the game at first. It just drops you on the map and expects you to figure it out. Once again, there's some more info in the manual, but it's not as helpful as in past games. The best thing it does is highlight the first 3 areas to explore, since the names don't show up on the map until you're already hovered over them, so actually navigating it is a chore. Anyway, once you get into an area, you wander from side to side, taking out respawning enemies that have no collision detection or knockback. And as they attack you, Link also has no collision detection, so I found myself dying without even realizing I was getting hit. Apparently, the shield works automatically, but only when standing still. Because despite holding it out at all times, he just lets things hit him. What a hero. Other items collected in these games feel like Nintendo gave Philips very strict rules on what they can and can't use, because aside from sword, shield, and bombs, there's not much here that feels like Zelda. You spend a lot of time chucking snowballs and firestones. You also stab people to talk to them, but it's okay. It's a smart sword that won't hurt your friends. Sure, stab away. I hate this, y'all. Wand of Gamelon feels like more of the same. Like, literally a good chunk of the manual is copied and pasted, but with Zelda and Gamelon replacing Link and Korodai. But same enemies, same looking environments, same bad collision detection. The only benefit here is less reliance on gimmicks like snowballs. Zelda's items are a little more straightforward, though she does use a lot of rope. I'd argue this is a slightly better game just because more enemies can be defeated with only the sword or possibly ridiculously overpowered bombs, but they're both so terrible it's like deciding between the current Republican presidential candidates. Talk about scary. Alright, I saved Zelda's Adventure for last because it's pretty universally agreed as the worst of the three, which is surprising given it's also more traditional. But also, my experience with it is pretty different from the original, so it's not quite as accurate of a comparison. I can find footage of the game online. I see the issues, but I always assumed it was at least a little better due to being top-down. Theoretically, less collision detection issues at least, since you're not dealing with timed platforming jumps. But I guess the first clue to its quality should have been the world named Tolamac. Y'all just put Camelot in a mirror and called it a day. That's bad. But aside from once again playing as Zelda instead of Link, and using a wand instead of a sword, it at least does feel more like a Zelda game. The items you collect are more traditional, like a boomerang, bow and arrow, hammer, that kind of thing. And the dungeons, called shrines, are not very good, but they're here. In general, this game just kind of feels like someone's lackluster Zelda fan game. It's not offensive or inherently broken, but it's also just not very good. It's slow, attacking feels bad, interacting with people is vague and confusing. I actually miss the fun animated cutscenes in this remake.
We were left with nothing but these trinkets to sell. Perhaps they will be of use to you in the underground.
And from looking at footage of the original, the wand slash, if you can call it that, actually works better and enemies at least have knockback when hit. I thought for the most part I was playing kind of an idealized version, but there's definitely some elements that are worse here. But regardless of which version, whereas the other two CDI games were at least unique despite being bad, this one's worst offense is just being bland. People remember bad games that stand out more than ones that are generic and inoffensive. But it is easy to play for yourself since it works with Game Boy emulators, so that's something. You just might not actually enjoy playing it with the barren world map and lack of guidance. I explored for more than I'd like to admit before I found the wand, despite being like one screen over from where you start. I don't see why they couldn't just give it to you at the start instead of having a 1 in 4 shot of guessing the right direction to head first. And this map is bad. You know how most Zelda games are laid out in kind of a grid? Yeah, this one is just like an ink blot test. Getting around is confusing, and it's not clear at all what items do, what you need to get anywhere, or even where to go first. In the first shrine, for example, I swear I tried to use the ladder on this gap, and it didn't work. I checked the footage of the original game, ladder across the gap. Not sure what I did wrong. I will say, the more simplistic graphics here make it a little easier to get around compared to the ugly mess of pre-rendered art in the original, but it's still just not enjoyable to explore. If Zelda 2 was like LaCroix, this game is like that new AI-flavored Coke. Like someone plugged the general formula of Zelda into a computer and just shipped what came out with no testing to make sure it was any good. Yeah, that metaphor works, I think. That's it. I can't handle anymore. I think I would have rather played a horror game than these. Or maybe cover the scariest moments in the Zelda series. That's actually a pretty good idea. I might come back to that. But for now, I need to get to work on the next actual Zelda retrospective video. So I hope you enjoyed this scary bad detour, and I'll be back soon with a real retrospective on what some people argue is not only the best Zelda game, but one of the best games ever made. Do I agree? You'll have to wait and find out. Have a safe and spooky Halloween, y'all. So actually navigating it is a chore. But they're both so terrible. It's like deciding between the current Republican... I can't say... It's too gross to say. I can't do it.